FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, he's a CNBC contributor, sits on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. When we see these headlines, Dr. Gottlieb, about variants and mutations, it's scary. And of course, investors want to know whether it's going to be potentially more deadly and more transmissible and what that's going to mean for lockdowns. Do you know anything about this new U.S. variant?
Yeah, well, my understanding is that the task force thinks that there might be a new variant here spreading in the U.S., and it might be the prevalent strain, largely because when they look at the curve in terms of the number of infections that we're having now, it seems to fit on top of the curve that's being experienced in the U.K. So the behavior of the strain that's circulating here in the United States seems to be behaving like the strain that's circulating in the United Kingdom. Now, it's not that strain. If it was, we'd recognize that because we're looking for it. But there's a perception that there could be a different variant here spreading in the U.S. that has characteristics similar to the strain that's spreading in the United Kingdom. So this isn't actually the fact that we've discovered a different variant here in the United States, although there are genetic changes to the prevalent strain here in the U.S., or that we've been able to correlate that with actual experimental evidence that proves that it's behaving differently. It's largely pattern recognition where we're fitting our curve on top of the UK curve. And right now, the trajectory of what's ensuing here in the United States looks a lot like what has ensued in the United Kingdom.
Well, potentially the good news on that is that the company that you sit on the board of, Pfizer, has come out and said that the vaccine appears to protect against the UK variant, the South African variant, which I think a lot of scientists were a little more worried about. My question is, how high is the probability that we get a mutation of COVID-19 that does not and is not protected by the current vaccine? I'm thinking of chickenpox and mumps and measles, which don't seem to have spread beyond a vaccine. What do you think is the risk for this?
Well, the experimental evidence that came out today from Pfizer, and it hasn't been peer-reviewed yet, seems to suggest that the vaccine is protective against the UK variant. They looked at 20 patients who had that variant, the antibodies that they produced, or 20 patients who were vaccinated, and then tested the antibodies that they produced against some of the mutations, some of the key mutations found in that variant. They didn't test it specifically against the key change that we're seeing in this South African variant. So the South African variant is basically the UK variant with some additional features that seems to mutate a region of the spike protein, that key protein on the virus surface that's used in the vaccines. That is the key one, the one that we developed some of our most productive antibodies against. And so that experimental evidence is underway. They're doing those experiments. We'll hopefully have that in the next couple of weeks. I think it's unlikely that you're going to see a mutation or even a series of mutations that fully thwarts our vaccines, because what we've used in the vaccines is the full-length spike protein. So you're developing what's called a polyclonal effect, meaning that you're developing antibodies against many different parts of that protein. So even if some of those antibodies don't work well anymore because certain regions of the protein mutated, you're going to have antibodies that bind to other parts of that spike protein. By comparison with flu, most of the antibodies that we develop to flu each season really target a very specific region of that virus, and that happens to be the region that virus mutates very easily. So that's why that virus can fully thwart our vaccines and why the coronavirus is unlikely to do that within the span of one season.
Dr. Gottlieb, given that some of the curves are looking similar to what the UK curves were a week or two ago, does that mean we're headed for full lockdown, as is the case in the UK, where it's clearly very necessary? The Mayor of London saying it's out of control in London, that 1 in 30 people have it, and deaths across all of England hit a peak for the whole of the COVID pandemic today.
Yeah, I think not necessarily, and I wouldn't necessarily draw conclusions by the fact that the trajectory of our curves look like the UK curve when you superimpose them and you sort of erase 2 or 3 weeks. You kind of go back in time and then try to superimpose our curve on top of theirs, because a lot has happened in the intervening time. We had holidays, which caused an acceleration in cases. We don't know how much that's contributing to the acceleration. Remember, the UK had a surge, then they seem to have a decline, and they seem to have a surge again. We seem to be following the same kind of pattern, but we had holidays in the middle of that. And so I think it's still hard to draw conclusions based on that alone. We know that the UK variant is here in the United States. We know it's becoming more prevalent, but it isn't the prevalent strain yet. And I think we're really in a race against time to try to get more protective immunity into the population with the vaccine, to hopefully thwart that from becoming the more prevalent strain. And the announcement today from President-elect Biden that they're going to try to push out more vaccine supply, I think is a good step, trying to get more vaccines in arms during a really critical window of opportunity we have to try to get protective immunity into the population.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.